what they say, never talk about politics, religion, or sex, lest you risk damaging your friendships. But what happens when you have three people whose friendship is built on debating those very topics? One's a believer surrounded by skeptics, one's a heterosexual surrounded by gays, and one's a moderate surrounded by extremists, and they're all hardly qualified. Introducing Hardly Qualified, a podcast recorded in prosperous Calgary, Alberta, where Will Connor, Rob Walker, and Angry Duck get together every week to discuss the issues of the day. Rob's on the left, Duck is on the right, and Will is stuck in the middle. And here they are, hardly qualified to pontificate about the issues they're talking about. But if nothing else, they're entertaining.
Well, that was quite the intro anyway. What do you guys think of that?
I like it a lot.
Well, I made it, so. Appreciation, kudos go out to my buddy, the other Will, the British Will.
The British
from
Will.
Bristol. The British Will from Bristol. He, I don't know if I want to out him too much, but he's in my raid guild, my WoW guild, and he's been friends with me for, or I've been friends with him. I don't know if he's really friends with me, but
it's not mutual.
Yeah.
This is
but no,
a
I've known him
bad
for.
thing.
Yeah, that's Will. Because I went looking for a male voice to do the intro and the outro. We're gonna get our friend Maya, who's a socialist and a feminist from Norway, and who's adorable despite all of those failings.
Oh wow.
Does this mean you have a crush on her, Ducky?
No.
Okay, I'm
No,
just double checking.
It means that I have genuine affection for her despite our political disagreements.
Fair enough.
Right?
Rather
well, a
like
lot of
the
people,
two of us.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to think that if you can't get along about, sex and politics and religion, then you can't get along at all. But I think both of her and I are capable of setting our disagreements about politics aside, and it doesn't produce any antipathy between us in a personal sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Anyway, she's a singer, and she's a songwriter, and she's an entertainer, I guess. And so when I put out the call for a female volunteer, I was like, maybe Maya would like to help me out. She was like, sure, send me something. So I'm in the midst of writing an outro script right now, and we're going to re-record the intro script with her voice as well to see whether or not we're going to stick around with Will in the front and Maya in the back, or if we want to consolidate and have the same person doing both or not. But that's something we can discuss afterwards, so nobody wants to hear us with our production nonsense.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I appreciate it. I think it was hilarious when I first heard that intro. I just cracked up. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So while we're dealing with the nuances of production and whatnot, we should probably let people know that we have hardlyqualified.ca and .com up, a product of too much caffeine on my part after our last day of recording. I think it went like 11 hours straight without that microsite.
Oh yeah, it was great. He spent 2 hours writing the FAQ and then pressed the remove button by accident and deleted it all.
Really? Oh, I feel so bad for you, Will. So bad.
All my answers were nice and detailed and friendly and conversational.
I liked them.
Wow.
And now if you go back, it's like, how can we get a hold of you? It's like email.
Yeah. I thought you did that intentionally, so I didn't see the long, involved, friendly version.
Luckily I did, because when he was talking about the site, I was like, ooh, really, a site? Clickety click? And I was surfing it and stuff as he was changing things. So I got a chance to see some of the FAQs before they went up. Anyway, today is currently, it's 18:30 on, what is it, the 11th of January, MST?
No, the 12th of January.
12th of January. It is Saturday afternoon or evening. We record on Saturdays, and the podcast gets uploaded and available for download at Friday, the following Friday. So this may seem to be a week out of date for anybody who's downloading the podcast, but it's because we need some time for post-production.
Well, and that way you get it on Friday and you have enough time to jump in and participate in the conversation before we hit record on Saturday night, right? So we now have discussion forums on the website, and every one of us has hardlyqualified.ca email address. That's will be posted on the website and also available on iTunes and all that other crap. So we're like an official podcast. Not bad for 2 sound tests, eh?
Now all we need are some listeners.
Yeah. We also need to get better at this.
Well, we've gotten some fan mail already. I signed us up with PodTrack right away, and we've already got about 50 downloads. So,
Oh, wow.
That's pretty good. And that's not including the three of us. So,
50 downloads.
Yeah, because I know I downloaded it like 4 or 5 times.
yeah, I know.
That's wild.
And quite a few from the States too. So iTunes decided to list us in their philosophy section. So I'm sorry if you've come here looking for something intelligent.
By design. Just kidding.
I would recommend the Partially Examined Life after you listen to this. That's a pretty good podcast. But no, I think we'll do well.
Well, if you're plugging podcasts, I like On Being by NPR. So, anyway, pretty good podcast.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I used to listen to Freakin' Bitches back when it was in every single one of its incarnations since, and Freak actually shut down KA podcast, which is the most recent one that she and her friend Christine Levine, who's a stand-up comedian, were doing together out of Portland, Oregon. But I guess they're done now because Christine's moving on and Freak is doing a bunch of school stuff. So the only podcast I currently listen to is the Thinking Atheist one every week, and I listen to it on YouTube because I don't I don't have an iPod. I have a cell phone for which I can't find my bloody headset.
One of those old feature phones.
Yeah.
My phone isn't even remotely smart enough to accomplish anything like that, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I have written out a short little outline designed to help keep us on track. And I've allocated the first 15 minutes of our 90-minute podcast to greetings between the three of us and a little bit of current events and what's been going on with you. And so I thought maybe we'd move that along and see if Bob wants to tell us what he's done this week.
Schoolwork. I'm joking about the schoolwork, although that's my week every week. Yesterday, I got to sit as a model for something called the Human Canvas Project here in Toronto, which is being done by a friend of mine named Maddie McLean, and it's on Facebook. You can look him up. And it was lovely. I got to go spend about an hour and a half with him and choose the colors that I wanted and the music that I wanted to listen to. And the basic goal of the project is for him to sort of express who the person is on their skin. And beautiful pictures. Like I just dropped my own, I'm looking at myself and my jaw dropped because it was just amazing to feel so well understood. So it's also
it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, like that was him, and I got to choose 5 colors, and he did that in 45 minutes. So I am quite impressed. But that was fun. It's fun to go ahead.
I must have no sense of art appreciation at all, because when I saw the picture I was just like, half of you is blue and half of you is orange. I don't know what that's trying to say. Like I can't analyze, like because you're saying, I'm so surprised I could be so easily understood, and I'm like, I have no idea what that's supposed to say.
Well, the funny thing, because one of the colors as you noted, Ducky, one of the colors was orange, but I chose it, and then my friend Maddie says to me, most people don't choose orange because it usually traditionally means that you're highly frustrated, but that's not how you use it. And I'm like, no, that's absolutely true. It was just really interesting because the one half of me is very serious and regal and very very well structured and sort of dark, and then the other half of me is very joyful and very playful, and so I really liked how that was expressed so well. So that, to me, that's why I felt understood, because it expressed both parts of my personality quite nicely. Thank you. So feeling deeply grateful today for that experience.
Shout out to Maddie McLean and the it's McLean, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Maddie McLean and the Human Canvas Project.
Yep. Go check it out.
Wonder what that says about us. Our logo color is orange and white
Well,
and black and gray.
I'd be more willing to bet there's some frustration underneath that orange, but I could be wrong.
Black, white, gray, and orange. I guess, whatever.
Because we like tiger flavored ice cream.
There you go.
Maddie actually looked at me. He says, "No, on the one side you look like Avatar, and on the other side you look like Tigra from Thundercats." And I was like, "That's awesome! I love that."
I detect a furry in our midst.
So that was my epic event this week. Was that? So.
What about you, Will? Did you get anything interesting happen to you?
Yeah, I spent 11 hours designing a microsite for Harley Qualified. I don't know. I was so excited that one person downloaded our podcast that I decided that I had nothing better to do, and spent way too much time, doing the audio engineering or post production and putting this website together and then screwing it up and redoing it and designing the logo and saying, hey, that kind of sucks, and redoing it, and so...
Are we seriously going to make the t-shirt? Because that's hilarious.
I don't know. We'll see. Maybe if people want the t-shirt. I guess they don't know what we're talking about. I'll post an image on the website. If people want a t-shirt, we'll make t-shirts. But, I'm pretty excited. I really want to... I want to hear from other people, get engagement. It's fun for us to talk ad nauseum. God knows we can. I mean, Ducky and I spent 3.5 hours yesterday just shooting the crap, but
about nothing.
Yeah. I think that was a sound test too.
Yeah. Well, I was testing my recording software, so.
So anyway, we're that's kind of been my excitement. I'm really happy with how it has turned out, and we'll go from there, I guess.
Neat.
So yeah, no, nothing interesting. Otherwise, first week of school, right? So like whatever. I'm doing a class, a general education class right now on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So that's kind of interesting. But
we'll have to go there sometime.
Yeah. That and a Java programming course and a course in cryptography. So guess which one I'm really enjoying?
Cryptography?
Yeah.
That's the one I would enjoy.
So,
I mean, one's informative, the other one is, necessary for your technical skills, but the cryptography one sounds like just pure enjoyment.
Right, yeah. I'm not much of what you'd call a math person. I mean, I've been in IT for 17 years. I can't say that programming has been much of a strong suit for me, so hence why I'm doing the degree. But anyway, before I talk myself out of a future job, maybe we should move on.
Well, as for me, I finally had some days off. We had a member of our staff at work decide he was just going to disappear for all the Christmas holidays, and we still haven't gotten a hold of him, so we don't know what the hell happened to him. But I ended up working 24 days straight, and finally, last week after the podcast, I got my first 3 days off straight, and that was nice. So I was a little excited about that. I came home and bought Spec Ops: The Line, the new game. Well, it's not new. I guess it's been out for about 6 months, but I got it off of Steam for like $10, and because I've heard nothing but good things. And what can I tell you? Oh my God, good things! This game, man, Spec Ops: The Line. It's like a game that it's a modern warfare shooter is basically what it is, in the line of like Call of Duty and Modern Warfare, which have been progressively getting more and more absurd in the sense that the whole purpose of the game is to teach you how to shoot people and to desensitize you to the nature of the violence that you're inflicting. Whereas Spec Ops Line goes exactly the other way. It basically says, okay, go out and kill all these people, and then it gives you a cutscene that says you're an evil fucker for doing it. And the whole and it makes you care about the characters that's going on, or the characters in the game and the plot and the story, and it makes you invested in it. And then it turns around and says everything you do trying to solve this problem just makes it worse. And it's a good commentary on the way our society looks upon violence and the glorification of violence. I mean, I would hesitate to say it's an anti-war propaganda type game, but it's definitely it points fingers at people who don't think or critically understand the nature of the violence that they're so willing to propagate in a video game. And I think that's something that we really don't see very often. Usually you have people who don't care, or you have people on the other side who are like, you know, war is pure evil, everybody needs puppies and kittens and rainbows. But it's not very often where you have a game that says violence is necessary, violence is effective, but violence should not be lauded as a good thing. And shame on you who do.
It's interesting because I'll just flag, Ducky, that I think I would enjoy on some level what you just described, but I think your description of the peace position or pacifism or nonviolent resistance was simplistic, and it's a caricature. It's a caricature. Well, you know, people who think that war is absolutely evil and that we should try something else are not sitting there going puppies and kittens and rainbows. It's a much more disciplined and much more difficult way of life than a lot of people realize. So I would just like to flag that, since I identify as a nonviolent resistor.
Well, continue with that thought. I actually, as you do, I got a question for you, Ducky. As a typical libertarian value might be you don't want the state to take any action that you yourself wouldn't be willing to take, and including any type of force. So anytime you consent to the state pointing a gun at somebody, you have to be basically willing to do so yourself, because the state is essentially doing it on your behalf.
Exactly. It's violence by proxy. That's one of the biggest problems that I have with people who claim to be nonviolent and yet are at the same time socialist or statist or collectivist in any kind. Because when you are asserting that the state has the power or the authority to exert force on your behalf, they're exerting that violence on your behalf. It's violence by proxy. And just because you're removed from it by one step or whatever doesn't make you any less culpable in that violence.
Yes.
So that's why I always challenge people who say I'm non-violent, or I eschew violence, or I don't like violence, and yet at the same time are, you know, in support of big government authority. And
can I ask a quick follow-up? Do you perceive me, because I'm not sure that we've had a full discussion on this, Ducky, so do you perceive me as part of the group that you have problems with?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
I mean, you are big government. You like
no, which is why the marketing fails, because I'm not on the left that way. I'm a terrible liberal, but I'm further to the left than you are.
Okay, well,
you know.
Even when it comes to simple crime and punishment, if you are willing to, if you're willing to accept that the police are authorized by the state to exert force in the apprehension of criminals, that makes you an accessory to the use of that violence.
The interesting, I hear that. But so now I have another question, because I'm not quite sure it's as simple as anyone who has a communitarian ethic and opposes violence is inconsistent, because I spent a lot of time when I was in Winnipeg, and still do to this day, spend a lot of time with Mennonites. So I spend a lot of time with Mennonites, and they're a community with a communitarian ethic that resists violence, statist violence, and they would acknowledge everything that you just said, Ducky, and yet they would say it is not right that violence is authorized by the state, and yet even as a community we are still contained within the state, and so we are also culpable even though we're resisting the violence. So there's no sort of squeaky clean. No one in this society, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum or your way of life, is innocent of violence.
Yeah, absolutely, and like I think the big difference is that people who claim to be nonviolent tend not to understand that fact. They may say I'm not violent and mean, that I am unwilling to exert force personally. But that's not a disagreement with violence as a tool, right? It just means I'm too much of a pussy to or you can go the other way and say I have too much respect for the sanctity of life. But it really bothers me when I have somebody on one hand who says, I'm non-violent and I don't like violence and I'm a passive resistor, and then on the other side they'll say rich people need to have all their money taken away from them and given to the poor people because they're stealers. And I don't understand how you can reconcile those two, conflicting, mutually exclusive thoughts.
Can I take a shot at that?
Yeah, go for it.
I get where you're coming from. In my perspective. Oh, here I am, stumbling over my words. Anyway, sorry. Dead air. Now I'm thinking, and I shouldn't be thinking.
Really?
All I'm thinking is ums and the waveform for ums and how often I do that and how irritating it is to edit. But anyway, moving on.
Stop looking at the waveforms, you nub.
It's hypnotic. Sorry. When I think about military service, right, I appreciate that there are people out there who are willing to put on a uniform and hold a rifle and defend the country, or even assault another country for our supposed benefit. The fact that there are people willing to answer the call to military service is appreciated. I appreciate it, and not. But I made a comment just about that on Facebook a while ago that I saw a soldier at Costco, and I went up to him and I shook his hand and I said, I really appreciate what you do, but I can never do it. And one of my friends who called me out on that, and he said, well, why don't you think you could do it? And for me, it's I don't trust my government enough to follow that order. But that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there who has a better judgment than I do.
Yeah, because I would have gone the other way. I would have said that the person who exerts the violence also suffers.
Yes.
Not to the same extent as the victim of the violence or the target of the violence if it's successful. But you have to admit that people who, are doing that on our behalf are taking one for the team, because even if there's the physical problems of being killed in the line of duty, but there's also the emotional or psychological problems that can come from taking violence and turning it into a trivial use, being so surrounded by violence and so quickly relied upon, whose only sole purpose is to exert that violence, that it takes something away from you as a human being. And that's a sacrifice that a lot of people don't seem to understand that our armed forces do. And that's, I think, is probably the bigger thing, because quite often what happens is when people are going against their anti-war protesters or whatever, they usually blame the soldiers and accuse the soldiers of being monsters. And what they don't understand is that they didn't start out as monsters. It was because of the violence that they exerted that they became monsters. And we shouldn't be holding them in scorn because of that. We should be holding them with tender appreciation, I think.
It's funny because you won't hear me say this very often. I agree with 99% of what you just said, Ducky. I don't know very many non-violent type folks, and certainly not very many Mennonites that would revile soldiers, but they would say exactly what you just said in terms of people that are required by the state to become less human on some level, because they execute that kind. Yeah, because they execute that kind of violence. So I think a lot of the nonviolent protesters that I know would say, isn't there a way to change, adjust, heal, whatever language you want to use, the systems that would require that sort of violence, which is why there's a lot of objection to the state as we currently experience it in liberal democratic societies.
Diplomacy only works if everyone's willing to put down their weapons, though.
Well, see, the thing is that diplomacy only works when there's force to back it up. A lot of people they're incapable of accepting, I guess, particularly in the peacenik anti-war crowd, that force is the ultimate authority. Force is the authority from which all other authorities derive. And without force, without the threat of force, without the option of force, without the ability to exert force, there's no authority whatsoever. So it really kind of seems like it's counterintuitive for people to say, is there another way? Is there another way? And no, there isn't, because the base of all of that is force.
I think what you're describing, I'm going to get some of my peacenik, especially Mennonite friends, to download this podcast, Ducky, because they'd find it fascinating. What you just described in their circles, especially Mennonite communities, is called the myth of redemptive violence.
Oh no, I'm not saying that violence is redemptive. Violence is something that we kind of want to, stay away from saying it's a good thing, but it's a necessary tool, I think.
I agree.
There's also, I think many political scientists and or policy studies people would definitely disagree with you there, Ducky. There are many means or many ways of power and governance that don't stem from the use of force. Unfortunately, I've only taken one class in political science, so I'm not much of an expert on it. But, a consent of the population can give legitimacy to a government and a state action without the threat of force hanging over them. And we look at a lot of governance and social organizations and whatnot, or even, well, maybe not so much employment. I guess the threat of revoking employment is forceful. But, when you're looking at a board meeting or whatnot, you have the consent of the governed and you have the consent of the participants.
You have the consent of a majority of the governed. What about those who don't? See, because what you're kind of talking about is voluntarism. And I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I think that's the ideal political structure. If somebody wants to be part of a collective, then that's fine. They should have the option to, but only if they consent to it. But in like a Western democracy where we have, 53% of the population votes for or agrees with the policies of the government, what happens to the 47% who don't agree with that? Does that mean that, their consent is ignored, their consent has no power, or the fact that they didn't consent means they're being force is being exerted against them?
Not at all. It's the burden of the majority to protect the minority from their will.
Classical liberalism, there we go.
I would agree with that. That's okay. All right.
That's John Stuart Mill, right there, among other folks. I'm not I guess I have a question for you, Ducky. Sort of returning to your slight disagreement with my characterization of redemptive violence. If there is no alternative, then that is the way that we actually think that violence is eventually going to stop. So the myth, the story says that the way that violence will end is that eventually there will be, on one side, there will be violence that's so overwhelming that no other violence will ever happen again. I don't know. Speaking, so now I'm going to bring religion into it, I guess, because I think that the reason as a Christian that I'm a pacifist is because I don't actually think that the story that might is the only power in the world that can exert force or authority, I think is false, because I think that love in loving actions and in political gestures and in how we build our communities is more powerful than that sort of violence. And we see that in the life of Jesus, and we see it in Gandhi, and we see it in nonviolent sort of people throughout history, that their conviction is that something other than violence is actually fundamentally running things, and we're ignoring it, and that's why we choose violence instead.
What's hell?
What's hell?
What's hell?
What we put other people through. I don't know. Give me some context for your question.
What I'm saying is that hell is force exerted by your loving and peaceful God to coerce cooperation out of his minions.
Okay, so
it's really hard for you to turn around and say that the life of Jesus represents peace, and then at the same time, if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell.
Do I believe that?
I don't know if you believe that. Do you believe that?
No. And it also, but depending on, so I'll be fair to my tradition. Again, the sort of God, the Father, the sky god with the long beard who looks a lot like Zeus, but that's a different conversation. So, this guy, God...
Is a direct descendant.
Well, who's Zeus. So Zeus will rotate you on a literal spit for not believing in him, and you will have eternal conscious torment for not choosing said loving God, is not actually a mainstream view in the Christian tradition. It's very common in the last 200 years in North America, for various historical reasons, including, political persecution and whatever else. So if you're being picked on, it would be really nice if God would come along and give you some righteous payback. But in the historical context, hell, Gehenna, was the valley outside of Jerusalem where you burned garbage. And so there was no sense of, if hell exists, it's God allowing you to cease to exist because you don't want to be with him. And in the Christian tradition, if God is the one who makes reality and you consciously opt out, where else do you go except for non-existence? There's another view in the Eastern Orthodox tradition that basically says that hell is a purgative fire. So everybody, I'm actually very close to this view. I'm not exactly certain, but this is the one I hope is right. The view that hell is a fire that everybody passes through, but the point is that the reason why you go through the purgation is so that you can live with God. So regardless of where you start, you will end up with God, which is called universalism in the Christian tradition. So everybody gets saved, and if everybody is saved, then hell will disappear because it has no more purpose. Everybody's been purged. So, those are three views within the Christian tradition.
I don't think that's the common understanding.
Yeah.
Not in North America, because again, we're dealing with the religious right in the States, which is not very plugged in, to be perfectly honest, with Roman Catholic or mainstream Protestant or Eastern Orthodox traditions.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's its own sort of spasm.
It just seems like arguing theology to get out of the base concept. To me,
I'm morally offended, and I think any sane human being would be, of this picture of God, of believe in me, or I'm going to rotate you over a spit for all of eternity because you didn't exercise your mental faculties correctly, and then simultaneously saying that God is love is actually fundamentally incompatible. And you don't have to, you're not obligated under any circumstances to try and reconcile those two, even based on the book that you don't particularly like.
Even if you treat the book as true, though, I mean, there are, aspects of the Bible that are morally reprehensible.
Yes, there are.
I don't understand. Yeah, well.
Yes, there are. The problem with...
I don't want to get into a theology debate. That's all. It's because we're getting sidetracked here, and it's been
we're talking islands.
27 minutes of introductions.
That's okay. We're fine.
We're fine.
I'm keeping track.
I just thought it was. We can go there some other time or not at all. But I just wanted to note, because the beginning of this conversation was about violence running the world, more or less.
Well, I
Go ahead.
would just point out that authority comes from violence. That's all.
Yes.
Or the threat thereof.
Sure.
Or the threat thereof, yeah.
But there are other kinds of authority that are not violent, I guess is what I would want to say.
Yeah.
So I think I'm closer to Will.
Like Will already pointed that out, and I conceded that, so
Fair.
yeah.
I think we're consistent to the topic. And if you'll indulge, I would like to continue down this path. Growing up as a Catholic, my understanding of God and morality was one of a vengeful, God full of retribution if you didn't fall in line, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But even if we were to take the antiquated idea that you proposed, and I would submit that any
Ancient.
well, okay, whatever.
Antiquated. As though it's not valuable. Okay, so the ancient idea that I proposed, yes.
To say that if you don't accept, or to live outside of God, to live outside that state of bliss and eternal companionship it's still a threat. There's still the consequence.
Unless you're a universalist, and like I said, and you get that from a lot of Eastern Orthodox thinkers, where they basically say, well, because God is all love, and because Jesus died for everybody without any exceptions, that was actually effective, and you, billions and billions of people later, all of us will. In Buddhism, the statement is we will all simultaneously attain the way. And although it has a slightly different meaning in Buddhism, there's still the sense of we'll all get there. So that's a legitimate alternative in the tradition as well.
It becomes a point of confusion, though, when you're talking about different flavors of theology, even within your own, within Christianity. You're talking about interpreting the ideas in different ways to make them relatively consistent with one another, but at some point God has his rules or he doesn't.
Sure. But if we agree, yeah, I agree with you.
And what you're proposing is this is kind of your best guess, which is kind of a hard way to leave a debase your ethics and morals off.
Well, I think in a lot of disciplines, if we were really honest, things are best guessed. Like I actually do think that there are facts and even religious facts. So I still as a Christian have a use for history and science. In a way that some of my more conservative brothers and sisters don't, because they just have the Bible and that's good enough for them. I no longer understand that view. I think in theology, if people were more humble, we would say a lot of the time it is the best guess, but we have these texts that we put together and see how they answer contemporary problems, and part of the Christian statement about that would be under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So the Christian community believes it has an ongoing experience of God's self that helps us sort of sort between our texts and determine which ones are more useful in this context versus that one. So yeah, a lot of theology is the best guess, and that's just epistemic humility about how much we know.
Do you have a response to that, Ducky?
No. See, I try to stay away from... Because, first of all, I'm not really well educated in the differences between the hundreds of thousands of theologies. Because they're all based on the same underlyingly unprovable concept. That there is an invisible wizard in the sky who thought existence into creation, or creation into existence. And from there, that's where they all go, and that's where they split apart, and they all disagree with each other about one thing or another. And I'm like, I'm interested in truth, personally. And
so are we, who believe in this alleged sky wizard.
Because,
just so you know, truth is a central value in the Christian tradition and in the Jewish and in the Muslim.
the problem is that most religion doesn't rely on rational, repeatable, experimentation, the kind of stuff that you deal with to weed out the stuff that's not true and to hone in on what is likely to be true, closer and closer and closer. And I have found that a lot of the time, if it's not in the Bible, it ain't not true. Because my grandpappy wasn't no monkey. And it just infuriates me. And so that's why when I hear people try to use theological doctrine or dogma to defend their statements and stuff, I kind of tune out. I can't argue with that, because we're not using the same rules, we're not using the same
I agree,
the same tools to debate the issue. So no, I do not have a response.
But that was quite a response. I do actually think that we agree on something, that sometimes religious people and the group of people that you are calling rationalists, I think there's overlap, but that's a different conversation.
Oh yeah, no, I'll agree that there's overlap.
Okay.
But the problem is that the way I see it is rational people don't accept anything until there's reason to accept it, and religious people tend to accept, at least at the very basic, that there is a supernatural cause to the universe. I think that whole concept, theists alike, they hold to that ideal that there is a supernatural cause to the universe, and because of that, that's the one part that they don't use their ration on. They don't use their critical thinking or skepticism on, and because of that, it kind of invalidates anything else that they base off of it. It's a foundation of it's a weak foundation on which to build your house of cards.
I hear you, and one of the ways that I approach it is that God is not a God of the gaps. So I'm not sure how to evaluate your statement about God being the cause of the universe, because I'm not sure. Maybe God has more to do with the meaning of the universe than scientific cause. So rationalism is one story that happens to have a lot of evidence about how the world runs, and theisms of various kinds are another story. But I think the vast majority of people, especially in North America, who adhere to religion actually do so because they believe they have experiences of the God they worship. So in other words, they're mystics. And so I think so. In terms of people not having experience or evidence, they interpret these experiences that they have as evidence for God. And of course, you and I disagree on whether that's a good move.
Yeah, I disagree, because I think we'll use the statement that my brain has the capability to lie to me, and I have to accept that if I want to be honest with myself.
And I think most religious people who I know, including a lot of folks that would be considered fundamentalists, who try to read the Bible or their sacred texts flat, and they don't care about science and they don't care about history. Even some of the people I know who are fundamentalists will admit, when they don't feel under threat, that they don't know either, and that that's a different conversation. Ducky says to me under the radar, he says, "Your God did flood the planet."
That was like 20 minutes ago.
Oh,
thanks for keeping up.
Okay, well, fair enough. And other technical instructions. Yeah, I don't know.
For our listeners, if that's why you're wondering where our pauses are coming from, you can probably tell that we're having a little bit of popping and sing from Bob.
Yes.
So we're trying to give, well, Will is anyway trying to give him text instructions on how to adjust his mic while we're talking, so we don't have to actually interrupt the talkingness.
Yeah, you guys kind of screwed the pooch on that one.
Yeah. Oh no, the secret's out now.
So I'm gonna see if this mic position works better.
Oh, that's way
That's
better.
way better.
Okay.
Yes.
Is the
Yeah.
sound just as good?
It's a little soft, but soft is better than whistly and poppy.
Yeah, we can boost the volume later.
Okay. Or I can
So-
turn my mic up slightly.
No, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Okay, fair enough.
We like you where you are right now,
Okay.
and I don't
okay,
mean
guys,
Toronto.
I understand. Yes, don't worry. Yeah. So I hear you. I hear you, Ducky, about what you're saying. But I hope that like a lot of the folks, even who are fundamentalists, will say, you know, I'm not certain, and
Mhm.
will be honest about how much proof they have, and I think that that's valuable.
Like I said, I'm not going to deny that. There's people who are critical thinkers and they're rational, but for whatever reason they tend to, abdicate their abilities when it comes to religion. They choose not to apply.
No, I see. I don't think that's true. Just because I think that knowledge is broader than what the Enlightenment says is rational, and that's a very
Yeah, see, like it's hard to have this kind of discussion because without having the same basis from which to work,
Mhm.
I mean, pretty much everything that a theist and a non-theist can agree on is that the universe exists. That's pretty much it, and then from there, that's where it starts.
I don't think.
And there's some
that's
people
true.
who don't even agree with that. So
well, fair
it's-
enough.
because I find that the exact same problem when you have equal rights or humanitarians or humanists arguing against feminism, because feminism is based off of a fundamentally flawed concept of society, and if you have one side that rejects that assertion and the other side who holds it as sacred, there's no way for the two to debate honestly with one another because they're coming from different places.
Well, you can debate. Sorry, Will, you're not getting a word in edgewise. I think that I think I just disagree more or less with your statement about theists and non-theists agree that the universe exists, and that's about as much as they agree on. A lot of theists and non-theists agree on how to be humane to each other, what good societies look like.
No, I meant from the top down. If you're going to go from the absolute basic, because in order to agree on how to behave with one another, you have to, that's like 17 steps down the line, is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
That a fundamental nature of the universe is that it exists, and pretty much everybody can agree that the universe exists.
Mhm.
There's a few who don't, people who think that it's imaginary or that it only exists for what we can perceive, or whatever the in-depth philosophy is.
Mhm.
But from there,
Existentialism.
is that what it is? I don't know. I'm hardly qualified.
It's also called it's also
The
anti-realism. Yeah.
Anyway, but then the next step is the universe exists. How did it get here? And theists generally assert that there is a supernatural cause, and non-theists generally assert that there's no evidence for a supernatural cause.
Fair.
So, like I said, it's a clash of worldviews.
Yeah. Oh, of course it is. And worldviews, but worldviews are not. Now, here's something philosophical, Ducky, that you and I will probably strongly disagree with. You can't actually prove your own worldview using its own axioms.
Yeah, that's why I have such a problem with theists who use their holy texts as evidence for their theism. I'm like, that's the same. That's like saying, comic books are proof that Spider-Man exists. It's just, you need to find evidence outside of the Bible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
there
for
isn't
sure.
any.
Well, I don't know about that, because I know that you hate statements like this, but it is up to communal interpretation too. And science is a community, and religions are communities, and English classes who are butchering poetry are are communities, and they all have interpretive.
Consensus, Bob.
Sorry,
Truth is not subject to consensus.
I agree
And that
with you, but
that
doesn't
that
decrease.
science is a community and it's consent. Like, I don't understand what you're talking about when you're saying science is a community whose assertions are based on consensus.
Oh,
Am I misunderstanding you, or
no, that is exactly
because
what
you
I
don't
said.
have to be a scientist to understand the nature? Like, it's not like only within scientists are they coming up with this stuff, and that only if you're a scientist can you accept the veracity, and that the
sure.
truth is different if you're not a scientist. I don't think that's true.
Well,
I think that
neither do
scientists are just people who, well, okay, then I misunderstood what you said.
What I'm trying to say is that truth is not solely some ahistorical phenomenon that has nothing to do with interpretation. Okay?
Yes, it is.
No.
Yeah, it is.
No.
I would argue that
Okay,
it's absolutely
but you
objective.
can't. Okay, so in other words, that means that the two of you are Neoplatonists, and that truth is sort of forms that exist somewhere. That truth is a series of mental constructs that you want matter to match up with. That's not how reality works. At least not if you want to be an empirical rationalist. Okay, truth is always interpreted and found within historical contexts. Okay, so you always have to pay attention to historical context in order to know the truth. That's just basic, because that's how we live as human beings.
You're going to have to provide an example, because that sounds absolutely retarded.
But that's how we live.
No, provide an example of what you're talking about.
Break it down to more of a lay level. Rob.
I'm trying to.
Because the idea that truth changes depending on what history book you're reading, that's fucking bullshit. That's called revisionism. You know?
But who's... Yeah, I hear you. Like, okay, the fact that...
Look. Okay, let me provide you with an example of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Now, you have a warlord who murders everybody in a village and burns it down.
Mm-hmm.
And then they write a history book. And the warlord's historian says the village never existed, there was no burning, and everything was happy and dory. And you had the one survivor from the village wrote the story down, and in the descendants of that guy, there's another history book that says, yeah, warlord came and murdered our village.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Historical context doesn't change the fact that the village was burned down. Whether it's the historical context of the book that Buddy's, the descendants wrote, or the book that the warlord's guy wrote. Those are irrelevant to whether or not the village actually burned down. So I don't know what you mean by historical context interprets truth.
History isn't just one damn thing after another. That's not what the discipline of history does. Whenever someone writes a history, like, I agree with you. If we want to talk about facts, like, it is a fact that my birthday was on a certain day that is called April the 5th, 1980. On somebody else's calendar, it will be a different day.
Yeah.
Okay?
But it doesn't change the fact that you were born on that particular day, regardless of who calls it what.
True. So, but if people don't realize that those two calendars can be reconciled to each other, somebody will think it's lying, or somebody will not have access to that fact in the same way. But how about another thing? Like, we write textbooks in history all the time, but we don't include, and we can't. This is the limitations of just being a human being. We can't include everything that's absolutely relevant to a determination of fact in a history textbook. And the fact is that history and science and every human discipline, just because there are human minds that are embodied and have biases and all these sorts of things, we all bring assumptions and ways of looking at things that don't necessarily compete with the truth, but we can't get away from them and somehow,
I'll agree with that.
Okay.
I'll agree with that. Absolutely people are capable of misunderstanding what's going on because of their biases. My point is that those biases do not change the truth. The truth is not dependent on how it's interpreted. The truth is objectively inherent, and it is one way. A pen is blue or a pen is not blue. Regardless if you're colorblind, regardless if you don't call it blue, it's not like if you call blue red, the pen magically changes. That for one person, it's chartreuse.
But it is though, because that's what they call it in their language, right? So what I'm saying is that
it doesn't change the property of the pen.
It's still 480 nanometers. Is still 480 nanometers. I mean, it doesn't.
Even 400. Okay, yeah. We're trying to argue the same thing from opposite sides of the coin. What I'm saying is, even the term 480 nanometers is a linguistic convention that describes something that actually exists, and we can't actually talk about. That's my point. We can't talk about truth without using language.
I'm not talking about truth. I'm talking about truth itself.
But we don't have access to truth itself without talking about it. That's my point. So interpretation is always there, because we can't. So this is why it doesn't make any sense to say that truth exists, period. In some sense it does, but as soon as I say it does, I had to use the language to tell you it does.
So it sounds like basically what you're saying is if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it make a sound, right? So I mean that's basically what it's saying is if nobody's there to interpret the action, then
the action cannot be true.
But the tree's still fallen.
Yeah, but if there's nobody around to observe it, why would we even be using questions of truth? Because it's outside of our knowledge.
That doesn't matter. It's still.
It doesn't change that it happened or that it made a sound.
Sure, but if we don't have access to it, then questions of truth are irrelevant.
It doesn't matter if we have access to it, though. Truth is not dependent on an observer. It's not dependent on the interpretations of that observer. It's not dependent on the ability of that observer to correctly or effectively communicate his interpretations or her interpretations. The point is that the truth is objective.
Okay, so everything that you just said can be applied to the Christian conception of the existence of God.
Who's talking about Christian? Why is this suddenly about religion again?
What I'm trying to say.
That's where it stemmed from.
Did it? Okay, I forgot.
Even if we agree on that, because I do actually think that there are things which exist and which are true regardless of how accurately I can talk about them, whether I experience them. Most of the things that you just said, I fully agree with.
Love to argue with stuff you agree with, man.
Well, I just think that the way that you're using truth is not nuanced enough to do justice to the topic, and that's why I'm saying no. Interpretation and historical location and where you come from and how you talk about things, you can still be trying to describe truth, and people can have multiple perspectives on one truth, and all of the perspectives can be correct. It's just a matter of how you fit the puzzle together. And if it's possible, because I'm not sure that it is, that a single human being or a single human community can have access that's almost 100% to this thing called truth. And so...
Well, of course not. Nobody's saying that we have to have access or we have to understand it completely. I mean, even the pursuit of knowledge that the scientific method provides us, it doesn't tell us what's true. It tells us what's likely to be true.
I agree with that.
Right? And we keep narrowing in, but there's no absolute certainty in science in pretty much anything. There's no absolute certainty in pretty much anything at all.
No, I agree with you. I do.
Right? But I don't think that the certainty begets the lack of certainty begets a lack of veracity in the nature of truth. Just because we don't recognize it, we're incapable of zeroing in on it, and we can't be absolutely certain, doesn't change the nature of the truth of which we're trying to be certain.
Okay.
Well, this is a hard and confusing one. Because
I think once again we're arguing different things using different words, and we're not understanding what each other is saying. That's why we keep going in circles.
But I think that you're actually talking about the same thing, but you're only like 5 feet apart.
Different perspectives on the same thing.
We know that the nature of observation affects the reality of the object being observed,
yes.
or perceived, and I would agree with you. I mean, that comes down to basic physics. There are experiments that have proven that. The same token, there are near certainties. So it's one of those things that I'm hardly qualified to talk about this, but I think I kind of understand the conflict, if not have no clue as to what the answer is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just comes down to basically there seems to be two camps. There's the people who I personally ascribe to that believe that truth is objective, the nature of existence is objective, and we are just trying to find out what it is. And then there's the group of people who say, well, no, truth, even if it is objective, is irrelevant because it's hidden behind this sort of wall of perception. And that all we can really concern ourselves with is the subjective nature of our perceptions regarding that apparently objective object.
I think where I am is precisely in the middle, and a lot of philosophers, and I can put up a link that will help people out, but the position in the middle of that is called critical realism, which basically says the universe is objective. I'm sitting here staring at my computer screen, and my computer screen actually exists. But my experience of my computer screen is always, the word is mediated through language. And so everything that I experience, even if it is objective, is still perception. And perceptions can be more accurate or less accurate. And we can't always determine the difference.
See, I wouldn't say there's such a thing as more accurate or less accurate, because, well, I guess...
Well, you just argued the opposite, man. We talked about the brain lying to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So we've gone from video games to the nature of epistemology. That's not bad for, 15 minutes running time or half-hour running time, whatever it is. So I'm going to kind of step it back a little bit here before we...
Well, let's change. How long? My clock is telling me that we've been doing this for almost an hour.
Yeah. So that's okay.
Yeah. So we got about half an hour left. I think maybe we should switch gears and talk about something else, because...
I have something we could talk about, unless you want to stay serious.
I would like to finish this one. I know we have to record another one right after this anyway, just because Rob's going to be out of the country. And I think that...
Because they don't have Skype in the UK, apparently.
Well, they do.
Well, whatever.
They do, but I'm going to be in the middle of schoolwork and 5 hours ahead of you folks, so...
I know.
More than 5 hours. More like 7.
7 hours, yeah.
Tuck you and I don't sleep, you know that.
Yes.
But anyway, I would like to finish this because I think we could make some headway on this within the next half hour, and then maybe hit the more newsy type stuff in the next session, if you will, if you guys are amiable.
Yep, yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Okay, so we started off talking about violence and state use of violence and consent to violence, and then we started talking about how that affects morality and theology, and then into epistemology. So let me go back, and I think I want to jump right into the middle of that timeline and say, can you see, Rob, how it can be incredibly difficult for anybody, or at least us, or myself, I mean, I won't speak for Ducky, but whatever, to base a moral and ethical code on something that you yourself would say is just a educated guess.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when the ancient morality being portrayed is so inconsistent and reprehensible to our modern views of ethics and morality.
Some pieces of that ancient morality are reprehensible. Yeah, but I think the additional piece, though, that I assume, and this is why I made the comment about history matters to me. And again, we get into epistemology because of who you choose to trust when things are reported. So in terms of morality, part of where I go is also history, because there was a man named Jesus who actually existed.
No, that's open for debate.
No, it's not by any mainstream historian I've ever talked to. And people like Tom Harper and Richard Dawkins and blah blah blah, and they write these they're part of these documentaries about did Jesus Christ actually exist. They're the laughing stock of the mainstream historical enterprise, because even really liberal people who write about Jesus readily concede that he existed.
Yeah, but there's no evidence for his existence. That's my point.
No, that's not the case.
Is there a grave? Is there bones?
Well,
is there
depending on who you want to believe, there's a grave. There are no bones. That wouldn't make sense in today's world anyway. Because the bones would have decayed by now.
The point is that the only evidence we have for the existence of Jesus Christ is anecdotal. That's it.
Is textual, based on text.
Which is based on eyewitness testimony.
Yeah, there's no corroborating evidence, which says...
We have sources from the Roman Empire. We have sources from the Roman Empire and from Josephus and from Tacitus and a few other historians that they mention, there's this guy, Jesus, who is called Christ by some who are now called Christians, and we executed his ass because he was seditious. Okay? So there's lots in the Bible, granted, but there are independent, non-biblical, there's non-biblical textual evidence of people stating that Jesus existed.
In a consistent time frame?
Yes.
Yeah, because the way I've heard it is it spreads out over 70 years. And you have to remember that Jesus lived in a time filled with messiahs on every fucking corner, and he was just the one who happened to be famous enough to,
But okay, that's a totally different discussion that we can talk.
But I mean, look at Che Guevara. There's another perfect example. We have actual physical evidence that Che Guevara existed.
Right.
Okay. But if you listen to the way he's being portrayed by a lot of people, he was some kind of hero. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's all anecdotal, how he was a freedom fighter, and they totally ignore the part that he was a rapist and a murderer, and he liked to chop up little children and eat them, and he was,
this is why there's a discipline called the study of the historical Jesus. How much about this Jesus character can we know based on standards of evidence that everybody accepts? And even within that field, there's debate. But everybody who's mainstream in that debate grants that Jesus, who is called the Christ by some, exists.
Using the phrase mainstream. I'm sorry, I just have to challenge you on that. The way you keep saying everybody in the mainstream accepts this, which implies that anybody who doesn't accept this is a wingnut.
Okay.
And I really have to reject that sort of characterization.
Well then, here's the thing. Then you also need to tone down your language of extremism on a lot of topics too, because we talk about the edges or the radical edges of something. The perception is that the radical edges are wingnutty precisely because they've been put through peer review or whatever your community uses to determine who's a legitimate voice. So there's politics involved, but
there's no such thing as a legitimate voice. There's only legitimate ideas. No, there isn't. There's legitimate ideas.
Then we have very different the thing is that
Yeah.
legitimate
I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I don't mean to
legitimate
sidetrack the
ideas-
discussion. It's just this mainstream. You seem
Okay.
to say that anybody who agrees with me is mainstream, and anybody who doesn't agree with me or
no,
whatever is
I'm
a
just saying
freaking
that-
doesn't need to be
okay,
listened
what
to.
I'm-
And I
what
think
I'm
that's
saying-
a really dangerous place to go.
Sure.
It sounds like an appeal to authority.
Yeah.
The
Or consensus.
the thing is that every claim to truth is an appeal to authority. Because even if you assemble all the evidence against everybody else, you appeal to your own authority because you're the one interpreting the evidence correctly versus everybody else. So
And here comes the epistemological rabbit hole. Okay,
no,
so
what-
let's.
no,
Can we stay away
What
from
I'm-
religion,
what
please?
what I'm saying about mainstream is that there's a broad consensus based on evidence that Jesus Christ existed, and the fringe folks who say he didn't actually have the deck stacked against them on many, many levels. Because we're not just relying on biblical texts to determine the existence of Jesus. Okay?
Personally,
Go ahead.
I'm willing to concede the fact that a man named Jesus exists. I think it's largely irrelevant to the conversation whether or not he
Okay,
existed.
but here's where I was going with that before I got partially sidetracked. Because a man named Jesus existed, and obviously I need to make an argument that has several logical steps, and I won't do it now. But the consensus of the Christian tradition is that that particular human being is the best representation of who God is. This is why Christians care about how much can we know about the historical Jesus, because Christians actually want to be worshiping the man who actually existed. And if we can find out what he said, what he taught, how he was, then we can actually sort through what in the Bible is a good picture and what's not. So I realize that that's an odd use of history, but that's why I want as much actually, empirically verifiable information about Jesus as I can possibly get my hands on, because that's the one who I want. That human being is the one who I want to tell me who God is. I trust his interpretation even over the rest of the texts, if that makes sense.
So what you're saying is the desire for evidence doesn't come from a lack of faith, but a means to clarify the signal from the noise.
Yes, that is what I'm
Okay.
trying to say. That's a great image. Thank you for that. I'll use that in a sermon.
Oh, great.
Because that's kind of exactly the way we look at everything.
Okay. Then
That the
give
world
us-
is filled with noise, and we have, well, on the process at least.
Sure,
But
but agreement.
I think we've
agreement
just
on
come to different
process is
conclusions. That's all.
I think agreement on process, or at least the heart of here's what we're trying to accomplish, is a pretty major agreement. I could be wrong on that one, but
We agree on so many different things. I don't keep track.
okay. Well,
You guys have agreed more in the last 2 weeks than in the last 15 years. It's scary. Is this indicative of our old age?
I was
Maybe.
gonna say we all
freaking punk kids.
we all growed up. That's what I was gonna say.
And I know some of our listeners are a little more aged than us, and they're thinking 30. You guys aren't old.
No,
but anyway.
we're not at
Oh,
all.
that reminds me of a web post that I just saw on Facebook where it said the caption reads, "I may be 40, but I feel like I'm 20 until I hang out with some 40 or 20-year-olds, and then I'm like, nope, I'm 40." And it's so true.
I have a quick story about that. In the first 3 weeks that I went to Trinity College, so here I am, and I'm 29 years old, and I'm sitting surrounded by 18 and 19-year-olds, and I'm talking across the table from me is a colleague of mine who's a mom with teenage kids, who's taking the same degree that I did, and all of a sudden I heard come out of my mouth, "Oh, these kids."
All kids these days.
And I realized that one of the major, because I'm overhearing conversations and some of them are going through first major breakup, and some of them are so excited about a first relationship and blah 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 blah. And I'm just like, oh, these kids, they're so naive, because here I am, I've been married and divorced. Is the major difference between me and them, and age and a degree difference in education. But yeah, it was just this bizarre moment of, oh my god, I think I'm an adult.
They're
now.
so cute.
When the hell did that happen?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I've always kind of felt like I'm one of those cantankerous old men who sits on the porch in his rocking chair, waving his cane at these kids, like, "Get off my lawn!" And I've been like that since I was 14 years old.
Yes, this is consistent with my experience of you, Ducky. Yes.
Except for it's more like, you come within 14 feet of my lawn, I'll blow your head off.
I don't have lawn. I have landmines.
I was gonna say, I just...
Sell Girl Guide cookies at your own risk.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
So
so we're sitting at
if
15 minutes left, you think?
yeah, I'm not done.
Okay, let's do it quick.
Okay,
What?
I'm moderating, so just chill, dude.
Oh my god.
Ducky's trying to take my job here. But anyway,
You have a job, Will. Your job is secure, at least in my mind. Whether that's a true statement is
Suck
up
up.
for debate.
oh, here we go. Okay, so, well, screw this. No, yeah. So, legitimacy of violence. Let's step it all the way back to the beginning. Then, we talked about that the consent of the governed. Screw it. I don't know.
Okay, closing statements.
I guess here's my thing is when it comes to the state enacting any violence on my behalf, whether it be building a library or overthrowing a company or a country for its own good, or a company for its own good.
I hope the library isn't an act of violence.
No, it is. It's exerting force without your consent on your behalf.
Yeah, it is.
There are
Any
lots of different
act-
definitions of violence.
Okay, when I refer to the exertion of force, I refer to any action that has an affectable physical outcome.
Then I reject your definition of violence.
Okay, so seeing as I made the statement, let me clarify it. And then you guys can debate the nuances and scare everybody else away. So,
I didn't say violence, I said force.
But what you just said was the exertion of force is violent.
well, okay, so building the library is a forceful action, and I happened to watch Glenn Beck and Penn Jillette talk, and I found myself agreeing with some of the libertarian ideals that they were talking about, which is scary. But
Not scary, it's the right way to go.
okay, settle down. But one of the things that made sense was that, one of the things that Penn Jillette said was whether you're building a library or invading a country, and take the more benign action of building a library, the government is still doing so with your tax money, which you don't have an option to pay. If you don't pay it, men with guns will show up eventually at your house to take you away to a nice little box and put you in concrete and steel, which is inherently a violent action. So, we like to say that our social systems are built to protect us, but they're not necessarily without the threat of force behind them. So while I don't necessarily mind, paying taxes to have roads and hospitals and, to be able to walk into a healthcare clinic and wait for an hour to see a doctor or whatever it is.
An hour? You must be on that private fast track healthcare system.
I live in the rich end of the city, but anyway, I digress. Or walk into the library or whatnot. I mean, these are all definite benefits, but they don't come without, the implied threat that if you don't capitulate and pay up your taxes, there will be consequences. And that goes back to, Hobbes and the social contract. And I get that, but that doesn't remove the fact that there's violence in that action.
Okay, on an I suppose, because I'm definitely one of the ones that will argue for implicit violence in almost every human action.
So would you put a gun to my head and force me to build a library?
Would I? No.
Yes.
No.
See, I would.
You would
And that's
put
the
a gun
difference
to your
between
own,
me and Ducky.
So
You would put a gun to
your
your own head?
own head and force yourself to build a library?
Yeah, that's not what I meant, and you guys
Oh,
know
come
that,
on.
you jerks. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that I believe in the social contract. I don't always necessarily agree with the terms, and that's the whole democratic process and a debate for another day.
We
but
live in liberal democratic states. If we actually wanted to opt out, then we would. Isn't it
Well,
Winston
we
Churchill?
couldn't, though.
Democracy's awful, but
Oh,
everybody else is worse.
Yeah, he said that democracy is the worst kind of government except for every other kind that's been tried.
Thank you.
And he's kind of got a point, because democracy is demonstrably failed everywhere that it's been tried. It always becomes a tyranny. It always becomes big government. It always keeps growing and growing and growing and becoming less and less by the will of the people. But it's still better than communism. It's still better than, despotism.
Right.
Arguably, I would say the only government would be but no government at all. That's better. But
I don't actually think, because maybe I don't think I do, have an interesting or idiosyncratic definition of politics, but anytime you have a group of people, you have a community and norms emerge. So you might not have laws, but you have politics, and so you have society. So yeah, government in terms of here are permanent or quasi-permanent stable structures that govern things from the top down. Sure, but I don't actually think that there's such a thing as no government, because there are always.
well, no, because the argument that I'm trying to make, though, is that you just said from the top down, and I think that government should work from the bottom up. It should never work from the top down.
I do too, actually.
And I think that's kind of the implication, is that despotism is from the top down and voluntarism is from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
So that, say you have 4 people in a room and 3 of those people want to have a meal, right? So those 3 people get together and they cook themselves a meal, right?
Okay.
They work together, they cooperate, they get an even share. The 4th guy who's on the outside, who decided not to help out, he shouldn't be forced to help out, but at the same time he has no right to a portion of that meal.
He might
think
not
that's-
have the right, but it might be the humane thing to do to offer it to
That's
them
not
anyway.
that's not the point. That's not the point. Okay, so if you have those 3 people who have put their work into it, and one of them says, well, that poor guy over there, he didn't help us, but he's hungry, so let's give him some of the meal we just made, right? What happens if the other 2 people say, no, we worked hard on this, so we get to keep it?
Then the answer becomes whose resources were used, not just the labor. Is it a communal resource?
Well, good point. See, the thing is...
Are you cooking the guy's food against his will? I mean, it's more nuanced than that.
We're taking over your kitchen and you can't stop us.
Well,
No,
that has happened. That image of we're taking over your kitchen and can't stop us, that's called colonialism, among other things.
The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that decisions should be based from the bottom up, that people should be only obligated to do that which they agree to do. Does that make sense? And therefore they only have the entitlement to the benefits or the consequences of that which they agreed to partake in.
Until such things as the macroeconomy come into play.
Perhaps.
Well, and the interesting thing is too that your community. I hope that what you're implying is that anything that you set up in terms of your community, like the kitchen, right? You put your resources together and you build a kitchen and you make food. When you find out that there are other people who are not part of your community that exist and they want in, and they weren't there from the ground up, what do you do then? Welcome to the problems of multiculturalism in Canadian society. Yeah, so I agree with you that hierarchies are ad hoc, or at least they should be ad hoc, and that communal norms or laws or whatever you want to call them can be readjusted to include more voices that have interest in the social contract. Yep.
But as long as policy is made from the bottom up, not from the top down. That's why my biggest disappointment in any government form is it's always, one person ends up being at the top and he or she decides what's going to happen, and if you don't comply, men with guns show up. Mm-hmm. And it's always men with guns too.
Oh, well, no, not necessarily.
No, I mean the phrase. The phrase is always
sure.
men,
with guns.
No, it's people with guns show up.
Yeah, the goons with guns show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of a good place to leave it.
For now.
I think we've walked back to the beginning, and
so no more complaining about running down rabbit holes, you guys.
Yeah.
Rabbit holes are fun.
We tried our best.
Yes.
But I think this worked really well.
Why didn't I take the blue pill?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So acknowledgements. Anybody got anything they want to say to people that helped out with the podcast, which is just us three and Willie right now? Mittens. Thank you, Mittens.
You know what? I would like to thank those who wrote in fan email. We've been and commenting. It's been a great encouragement to us. Please do so more. Yeah. My email address is will@hardlyqualified.ca. Rob's is rob@hardlyqualified.ca, and Ducky's is angryduck or ducky at hardlyqualified.ca. Yeah.
I have two.
You're special.
I'm special. Okay.
Or you can do Robert or William at. I mean, those will all get there. The short and the former will all get to us individually. Additionally, I would encourage, I beg you all to please at least just show up on the show notes on the blog on the website and say, hey, you guys suck, or hey, that was a great job. And if you feel like contributing a little more, jump into the discussion forums and let us know what you think.
Yes,
yeah.
The more the merrier. Otherwise,
it really helps to know that we're not talking in a bubble.
Well, we're not. We're talking to each other. But you know what? It's great to share.
No, I mean that the three of us are not talking. It's a 3-person bubble. It really validates all the effort that we're putting into it, just to know that there's actually somebody listening.
Absolutely. And you know what? Personally, I claim to adhere to a scientific mindset, so I want to know if I'm wrong. So if I'm wrong, please tell me, because I sure that I am. It's just a matter of...
About a great many things.
About what it is and to what degree.
Right.
So...
I'm absolutely
we would love
sure
you all
that
to...
at least 1/3 of what I tell you is wrong. I just can't always tell you which 1/3 it is.
It's our new guessing game. Everyone can play along.
So I hope you guys all join us next week for our episode where we'll be talking about multi-tiered justice systems, the I Don't Know More movement, and whatever else comes up.
Excellent.
I want to talk about Mars 1.
And Mars One, yes,
Mars
absolutely.
1. Let's talk about Mars 1.
And Death Stars.
Okay, we'll talk.
And Death Stars. I think we should. The I Don't Know More and the other one that we should push that. Let's talk about Death Stars and the Mars 1.
Yeah, well, no. But I'm sure we'll be able to integrate them all.
Sure.
So until then, thank you, everyone. I'm William.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Angry Duck. And you're going to be hearing the new outro, hopefully, provided that I get it built before we actually air this show, right after this. So thank you to Maya for recording it, and we'll see you guys next week.
See you, guys.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Hardly Qualified. Our website can be found at hardlyqualified.ca, and there you can download episodes, leave comments, and check references and links mentioned in the shows. The hosts are on Twitter. Will is at Will Connor, Rob is at theologywriter, and Ducky is at angryduck_HQ. They can also be reached by email at will, rob, or angryduck at hardlyqualified.ca. The podcast is recorded on Saturday afternoons and scheduled for download the following Friday, which can also be found on iTunes. Thank you, and tune in next week.